The wind carried dust across the wide-open plains of Wyoming, settling like a hush over the sun-baked town of Dry Willow. It was a place too small for ambition, too quiet for dreams, and just lonely enough for a man like Elias Grant to call home. Elias had built a life with his bare hands, a weathered ranch nestled between rocky hills and wild mesquite. His herd was modest, his income modester, and his evenings lonelier than any man his age deserved. 35, rugged, broad-shouldered, and quiet as the dawn. Folks said he kept more conversation with his horses than with people. But Elias had grown tired of silence, so he did something desperate. Something he never thought a man like him would do. He mailed a letter to the agency in St. Louis. "I'm seeking a practical woman who knows her way around a farmhouse and isn't afraid of the West. No interest in frills, drama, or poetry. Just someone to share meals, keep the house, and maybe, after some time, keep me company too." It wasn't a love letter. It was a contract of sorts. Functional, plain. 3 weeks later, a reply arrived. Her name was Clara Mae Dawson, and she was coming on the 10:20 train. The platform was nearly empty when the train rolled in, steaming like a dragon in the golden evening light. Elias waited with his hat in hand, his Sunday shirt tucked tight and boots newly polished. He expected to see a plain woman in cotton dress and braid, someone who blended into the land the way wild sage did. But what stepped off that train was no plain farm girl. Clara Mae wore a faded green dress that fluttered slightly at her knees, like it remembered the wind. Her eyes sparkled, like she knew secrets the prairie hadn't heard in 100 years. And her boots? Worn down from walking long roads, not just tilled earth. Elias blinked. "You, Clara?" She grinned, guilty as charged. "You must be Elias, the cowboy who writes like he's applying for a business partner." He coughed. "You're not what I was expecting." "I get that a lot." She held out her hand. It was rough, sun-darkened but warm. She smelled like lilac and train smoke and something a little wild. And just like that, everything Elias thought he ordered unraveled like a spool of twine in the wind. That evening, under the open sky, Elias hitched the wagon while Clara sat in the back, legs swinging like she'd done this before. She looked around at the dusty horizon. "Quiet out here." He nodded. "You'll get used to it." She smiled without looking at him. "Maybe, but don't expect me to stay quiet." He glanced her way, the kind of glance that lasted a heartbeat too long. And for the first time in years, Elias felt something stir in his chest. Not love, not yet, but a knowing. She was not what he ordered. But maybe, just maybe, she was exactly what he needed. The ride to Elias's ranch was long, but Clara didn't mind the silence. Not the kind that came from nature anyway. The sun sank behind jagged hills, painting the sky in fire and gold. Coyotes sang somewhere far off, and the creak of the wagon wheels was the only rhythm they shared. Elias finally broke the stillness. "You've traveled far?" Clara nodded. "From Missouri. Took me 5 days, 2 trains, and a lot of convincing at the depot that I wasn't some lost girl. You don't seem lost to me, she smiled. I'm not, just starting over. Elias didn't ask more, and Clara didn't offer. Some stories weren't meant to be told on a first night under a western sky. The ranch came into view, quiet and standing proud against the land. It wasn't grand. A 2-room cabin, a barn, a few fenced pastures, but it was cared for, honest, lived in. I know it ain't much, Elias said, his voice low with embarrassment. Clara stepped down from the wagon and took it all in. I didn't come for the lace curtains. That made him chuckle, a soft, rare sound that even surprised him. She turned to him. Where do you want me to sleep? Elias hesitated. You can have the room. I'll take the cot near the fire. Clara raised a brow. You don't need to do that. Maybe not, but I will. She nodded. Suit yourself, cowboy. That first night was awkward in the kindest way. Clara unpacked a single trunk filled with practical clothes, a few worn books, and a small locket she didn't explain. She cooked a simple stew with what little he had. And Elias found himself eating slower, just to make the moment last. Later, while she washed up, Elias sat by the fire, boots off, staring into the flames like they had answers. He hadn't expected her to laugh so easily, or speak her mind, or carry herself like she'd ridden storms and come out the other side stronger. He ordered a quiet farm girl. But Clara wasn't built for silence. She was made for resilience. As the nights passed, so did the space between them. Slowly, Clara learned the rhythm of ranch life, feeding the hens, collecting eggs, fixing the stovepipe with her sleeves rolled up. She didn't flinch at the cold or complain about the dust. She was all elbows, courage, and calluses, with a wit that could catch Elias off guard more than any stampeding steer. And Elias? He started waiting for her laughter each day. He began shaving before breakfast, cleaning the barn twice, just because she liked the smell of fresh hay. Still, neither of them spoke of what came next. Not yet. One evening, under a blood-orange sunset, Clara leaned on the porch rail, arms folded. You know, this marriage thing, she said, half-teasing. Most folks seal it with a kiss. Elias nearly dropped the mug in his hand. Clara grinned. Relax. I'm not asking. Just saying. He cleared his throat. I figured we'd take things slow. She looked at him then. Really looked. Slow's fine, she said, voice softer now. But don't take too long. Life doesn't always wait. And with that, she went inside, the screen door creaking behind her. Elias stood alone on the porch, heart pounding like hooves on dry earth. He had ordered a woman to fill the empty space in his life. Instead, he got a woman who filled it with questions, laughter, and the unsettling hope that maybe, just maybe, he could love again. The next morning came early, with a copper sunrise stretching over the plains like a fresh promise. Clara was already outside by the time Elias stepped onto the porch, rubbing sleep from his eyes. She was barefoot in the garden patch, sleeves rolled up, trying to wrestle a stubborn weed from the earth. Morning, she called, not looking up. Morning, Elias replied, surprised by how natural the greeting felt on his tongue now. He leaned on the porch post, watching her. "You know that patch is mostly rocks, right?" She wiped her brow with the back of her wrist. "So, makes it worth planting. Things that grow here gotta fight harder. That makes them stronger." He blinked, and for a moment, he saw himself in her words, rooted in hard soil, surviving where others might have withered. Over the next few weeks, the rhythm between them shifted from awkward to easy, like wagon wheels settling into the ruts of a familiar trail. They shared breakfasts at dawn, strong coffee and Clara's cornbread that always came out just a little too crispy on the edges. She helped mend fences and showed Elias how to patch his shirts without sewing them crooked. Elias taught her how to saddle a horse, and she taught him how to laugh again. But they still hadn't touched. Not even once. Not a hand held. Not a kiss stolen. Just the tension of something quietly building, like thunder behind a far-off hill. Then came the letter, a plain envelope from Missouri. No return address. Clara found it tucked in the day's mail and read it on the porch, her back to Elias. He noticed her shoulders tense, her fingers clutching the paper tighter than they should have. "You all right?" he asked gently. She folded the letter slowly, pressing the crease with her thumb. "Just a reminder," she said, "that some people don't stay gone, even when you hope they will." She didn't say more, and Elias didn't press. But that night, she didn't sing while cleaning dishes like she usually did. And Elias caught her staring out the window longer than usual, toward the hills, toward the place she came from, but never spoke about. The next day, she was back to herself, or at least the version she wore like a coat. Strong, steady, with a grin just sharp enough to hide the ache underneath. "Let's ride," she said out of nowhere. Elias blinked. "Ride? I've seen every inch of your barn and garden. I want to see the land." So they saddled the horses, his buckskin gelding and the paint mare he'd let her name. Juneberry, she called it. And they rode out into the hills, through golden fields and creek beds, whispering with snowmelt. For a while, they didn't talk. They just breathed the open air, letting the wind say what their mouths couldn't. Then Clara said softly, "Back home, no one listened when I spoke. Out here, it's like the land listens." Elias nodded. "It does. If you speak with your heart." She looked at him, really looked this time. Her eyes weren't teasing anymore. "You ever get tired of being alone out here, Elias?" He didn't answer at first. Then quietly, "I used to think being alone meant I was safe. Now I'm not so sure." Clara's gaze softened. "Same." They rode in silence after that. But it was a different silence. Fuller somehow. Closer. That night, as they stood beside the porch, watching fireflies drift in the dark, Clara spoke again. "You don't have to kiss me," she said. Arms crossed, voice firm, but almost shy. "But I need to know if you're ever going to." Elias looked at her, like he was still catching up to the moment. "I didn't order love, Clara," he said. She stepped closer, just a breath away. "I know, but maybe love found you anyway." And then, without waiting, she turned and walked inside. Not angry, not disappointed, just patient. Waiting, Elias stood there in the dark, heart thudding. And somewhere deep inside the quiet cowboy, who'd never believed in fate, A crack opened wide enough to let something new in. Maybe he didn't order her, but maybe, just maybe, she was the one thing he never knew he needed. The next morning, Elias woke earlier than usual. The sun hadn't yet cleared the hills, and the sky was still bruised with lavender and gray. He sat on the edge of his cot by the fireplace, staring at the embers, like they held the answer to something he hadn't quite dared ask. Clara's words from the night before echoed through him. "I need to know if you're ever going to." He rubbed the back of his neck, stood, and walked quietly to the door of the small room where she slept. He paused, not to intrude, not to knock, just to listen. But she was already up, out back. Again, she was always up before him now. When he stepped outside, he found her in the barn, brushing Juneberry. The way she moved, gentle, methodical, humming low like a woman who'd made peace with hard mornings, stirred something deeper in him than words ever could. He didn't speak at first, just leaned against the stall, watching her. Finally, Clara glanced up. "Morning," she said, her voice easy, like nothing hung between them. "Clara," he began, but his words caught in his throat. She turned fully to face him, brush still in hand. "You don't have to say anything. I meant what I said, but I didn't mean to push you." "No," he said quickly. "It ain't that. It's just, I never learned how to be close to someone without losing something." Clara's eyes softened. "Who did you lose, Elias?" He hesitated. Then quietly, "My younger brother. Died in a stampede when we were boys. I was the one holding the rope." Clara stepped forward, her voice low and sure. "You blame yourself. I didn't protect him. I thought if I kept the world at a distance, it wouldn't take anything else from me." She set the brush down and took another step, close enough now that he could feel the warmth of her presence. "Elias, I'm not here to take something from you," she said. "I'm here because I see something in you that's worth standing beside." That's when it happened. No lightning, no grand gesture, just a quiet moment where he reached out, finally, and touched her hand. And she didn't pull away. The kiss that followed was hesitant, like the first time someone opens a long locked door. It wasn't rushed or passionate or perfect. It was honest. It said more than either of them had dared admit. And when they pulled apart, Clara looked at him with that same wry smile she'd worn the day she stepped off the train. "Well," she said, breathless but calm, "that took you long enough." Elias chuckled, forehead resting gently against hers. "Reckon I had to be sure." "Are you?" He looked into her eyes. "I am now." From that day on, things between them changed. Not in a loud way, but in small, important ones. Elias made space in the dresser for her things. Clara mended his old coat without being asked. They shared coffee from the same cup some mornings, and held hands without needing a reason. And though they still hadn't spoken of forever, it hovered between them like the scent of fresh rain, something waiting to fall in time. But peace never lasts long on the prairie. One evening, just as the first summer storm rolled in, a stranger rode into Dry Willow. Tall, lean, wore a black hat pulled low, and carried a folded newspaper under one arm. He asked at the saloon for Elias Grant. Then he asked about Clara May Dawson. The bartender pointed toward the hills, and the stranger smiled. Not kindly. Out at the ranch, Clara and Elias sat side by side on the porch, watching the lightning dance across the sky. She sipped from her cup. Ever feel like something's coming? Elias nodded slowly. Sometimes. And though he didn't know it yet, something was coming. Something from Clara's past she hadn't spoken of. But when the dust settled, it wouldn't break them. Because what they had now, this quiet, slow-growing, bone-deep kind of love, was made to weather storms, even the ones that came on horseback. The storm broke just before midnight. Rain slapped the roof in sheets. Thunder rolled low and restless across the plains, and the wind bent the cottonwoods outside like dancers caught mid-sway. Elias stirred from sleep, instinct prickling in his chest, the kind that warned a cowboy when something was wrong, long before words did. He slipped out of bed quietly and padded across the creaking floor to the window. A figure sat on a horse beneath the edge of the barn awning, waiting, watching. By sunrise, the rain had gone, but the tension lingered like smoke after a fire. Clara came into the kitchen with damp hair and tired eyes. She paused when she saw Elias standing by the door, rifle resting just inside the frame. "Something happen?" she asked. He didn't turn. "Somebody rode in last night. Didn't come up to the house. Just watched, then left." Clara's expression didn't shift, but her voice dropped a half tone. "Did you see his face?" "No, but I got the sense he wasn't lost." She nodded slowly, then poured herself coffee with a steady hand. Too steady. Elias watched her carefully. "You know who it might have been?" There was a pause, and then Clara said, "I think I do." Later that day, Clara stood alone, out by the fence line, the wind tugging at her skirt, her hands gripping the rail tight. Elias came to her side, quiet but firm. "Talk to me, Clara." She exhaled, eyes fixed on the horizon. "His name's Wesley Boone," she said. "He used to work with my father on his land back in Missouri. But when Pa died, Wesley figured the land and everything on it, including me, was his for the taking." Elias's jaw clenched. "He tried to marry me, saying it was what my father would have wanted. I told him no. Told him I was leaving. He didn't take it well." She looked up, eyes clear but tired. "I thought the distance would keep him away." Elias said nothing at first, then reached over and took her hand, not as a gesture, but a promise. "He ain't taking you now. Not here." Clara squeezed his fingers, grounding herself in the feel of him. "I didn't want to bring trouble into your life," she whispered. "You didn't," he said. "You brought you. That's all I ever needed." That evening, just as the sun began to drop behind the hills, a rider came down the path. Black hat, long coat, and the same crooked smile Clara remembered from a lifetime ago. Wesley Boone. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching the dry dirt, and tipped his hat toward Clara, like they were still neighbors on some Sunday afternoon. "Clara May," he drawled. "You sure do pick strange places to disappear to." Elias stepped forward, calm but unmoving. "You've come far enough," he said. Wesley grinned. "And you must be the mail-order hero." Elias didn't flinch. "You're not welcome here." Wesley's eyes flicked toward Clara. "Ain't here for you, cowboy. I'm here for her." Clara didn't step back. She didn't tremble. She simply said, I already told you no, Wesley. I don't owe you anything. His smile twisted. You sure about that? You think letters and wagons change what's real? Elias moved between them, shoulders squared. She doesn't belong to anyone, but she chose to be here. And if you're smart, you'll ride back the way you came. There was a long, standoffish silence, the kind that hummed like a rattlesnake in dry grass. Then Wesley turned, slow and mocking, back toward his horse. This ain't over, he said, mounting up. And with a final look that tried to linger too long on Clara, he rode off. That night, Elias sat at the edge of the bed, oil lamp casting a soft glow over the room. Clara came and sat beside him. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For standing there. For not asking me to explain more than I wanted to. He looked at her, expression raw and real. I'd stand in front of anything for you, but I'll never stand in the way of your strength. She rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time, the weight of the past, hers and his, felt just a little bit lighter. Out on the plains, the night stretched wide and quiet again. But something had changed. The past had come knocking, and Clara hadn't run. She stood her ground, and Elias had stood beside her. What grew between them now wasn't just affection. It was trust, root deep, the kind that no storm could wash away. Days passed, and Wesley Boone didn't return. Not in person, at least, but his presence lingered. Every creak of the gate, every stranger riding near the edge of the property, stirred Clara's nerves just enough to make her spine tighten. And Elias noticed, not with questions, but with quiet care. He started double-checking the barn locks at night, sharpened the fence stakes, cleaned his rifle without a word. But more than that, he listened. When Clara wanted to talk about Missouri, about the pressure, the judgment, the fear, Elias didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix anything. He simply sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and let the truth come out at its own pace. One morning, Clara stood at the edge of the newly growing garden, her boots covered in dew, her eyes watching green shoots rise from the broken earth. Elias came up behind her. Looks like something's taking root. She smiled. Told you it would. Even bad soil can grow something good if you give it a chance. He nodded slowly. I reckon that's true of people too. She looked at him then, soft, grateful, but something more. I've been thinking, she said. I didn't just leave Missouri to escape Wesley. I left because I didn't know who I was without all that noise telling me who to be. And now, she took his hand. Now I know I'm someone who belongs. Right here. That afternoon, they rode together to the general store in Dry Willow. The first time Clara had gone into town since Wesley showed up. The townsfolk stared a little, as small towns do. But Clara kept her chin high and her smile steady. She picked out fabric, flour, a new brush for Juneberry's mane. Elias watched her, heart rising quietly in his chest. You're not afraid, he said later, as they tied the parcels to the wagon. I am, she replied, honest and sure. But I won't let fear decide who I am anymore. It was later that night, beneath a sky thick with stars and the soft hum of summer crickets, that Elias finally said it. They were sitting by the fire pit, not talking much, just enjoying the kind of silence that feels full instead of empty. I never believed in second chances, he said suddenly, eyes on the flames. Figured the life I had was the one I'd always have. Clara didn't speak, just watched him with those patient eyes of hers. But then you got off that train, he continued, and everything changed. Not because you fixed anything, just because you stayed. He turned to face her fully now. I think I've fallen in love with you, Clara May Dawson. Her breath caught, not out of surprise, but relief. And then she leaned forward, touched his cheek, and said, Good. Because I've been in love with you since the day you gave me your coat, when it was still 70 degrees outside. They laughed together, that quiet kind of laughter that feels like home. And this time, when they kissed, it wasn't hesitant. It wasn't careful. It was certain. They didn't speak of marriage right away. They didn't need to. Love was already stitched into every chore shared, every sunrise watched, every word left unspoken. The house no longer felt too small. The silence no longer felt empty. And the man who once ordered a simple farm girl had, without meaning to, built a life with a woman who was anything but simple, and everything his heart had longed for without even knowing it. But the prairie never stays calm for long, and somewhere beyond the hills, Wesley Boone wasn't finished. The trouble he would bring next wouldn't come on horseback. It would come with papers, threats, and a legal claim no one had expected. But Clara and Elias were no longer alone. And some roots, once planted, grow deep enough to hold through any storm. Summer deepened across Dry Willow. The garden flourished under Clara's hands. Green beans climbed trellises. Tomatoes ripened under the sun. And even the once barren row of squash had started to bloom. It felt like the land itself had finally begun to trust her, just like Elias had. But trust doesn't always keep trouble away. The letter arrived on a Monday, delivered by the same dusty rider who brought flour and tools from town. Tucked inside a wax-sealed envelope with Boone and Finch Law Office printed in the corner. Clara opened it on the porch while Elias mucked the barn. Her eyes skimmed the lines once, then twice. Then she sat down hard on the steps and stared into nothing. When Elias came back, wiping sweat from his brow, he knew something had shifted. Clara? He asked. She held the letter out with trembling fingers. He read it slowly, carefully. His jaw tensed with every line. A legal claim has been filed in the county seat of Twin Forks. Wesley Boone is contesting ownership of your late father's land. He alleges that you fled under fraudulent circumstances and left the property unsettled. If unchallenged, full ownership reverts to him within 60 days. Elias folded the paper neatly and looked up at her. We'll fight it. Clara shook her head, voice low. I don't even want the land. But if he gets it, he wins. She stared out at the hills. And I'm tired of running. 2 days later, Clara and Elias rode to Twin Forks, a larger town with real roads, a courthouse, and men who wore vests and used pens more often than shovels. They met with a soft-spoken lawyer named Mr. Hallbridge, who listened patiently as Clara explained everything. Her departure from Missouri, Wesley's harassment, her refusal to marry him, and the false claims. You have a strong case, Hallbridge said. But it would help if we had any written record. A will, a deed, anything that proves your father intended for the land to pass to you. Clara nodded slowly. There was a letter. I think Mama may have kept it. Elias's brow furrowed. Where is she now? Clara's voice cracked. She's buried on that land. They returned to the ranch in silence. But Elias's mind was already turning. We're going back, he said that night, as they sat near the hearth. To Missouri? He nodded. We'll find that letter. Or at least we'll face what's waiting there. Together. Clara looked into the fire, hands resting over her knees. I left that place afraid. If I go back, it has to be for something more than fear. He reached over, touched her hand. It'll be for truth, and maybe closure. She looked up and smiled, thin but strong. You sure you're ready to meet the ghosts of my past? I've already fallen for one, he said softly. They packed lightly. Travel clothes, a few personal items, and the small silver locket Clara always kept near. Juneberry and Elias's gelding were saddled early at dawn, and by sunrise the two of them rode east, across plains, rivers, and the long stretch of road back to Clara's beginning. The journey was quiet, but intimate. They camped under stars, shared canteens, and took turns leading through rough terrain. Sometimes they talked about the future, a new barn roof, maybe a dog, and sometimes they just rode in silence, letting the rhythm of hooves say what words couldn't. 5 days later, they stood before the old farmhouse Clara had once called home. It was abandoned now. Wood grayed by time, windows broken, the porch half collapsed. Weeds had overtaken the yard, and the trees whispered with memories. But Clara didn't flinch. She dismounted, walked up the worn steps, and opened the door. The house groaned in protest, but it still held. Inside, the dust danced in the light from a broken window. Clara moved with purpose, past the hearth, through the narrow hallway, and into what had once been her mother's sewing room. There, beneath a loose floorboard, they found it. A faded envelope with her father's handwriting, and a note that read, "To my daughter Clara, this land and the freedom to live as she chooses is hers alone." Tears welled in her eyes. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, steady as ever. "You were never running," he whispered. "You were surviving." She turned to him, emotion brimming. "Now I'm ready to start living." They left Missouri, not with fear, but with proof. And something deeper, not just a letter, but a reclamation of self. Clara had faced a place that tried to silence her, and walked away stronger than ever. Back at the ranch, the sky opened up into a brilliant late summer storm. The kind that nourished the land more than it harmed it. And beneath it, Clara and Elias stood together. Not just a woman and a cowboy anymore, but two souls who had weathered the past and now stood ready to build a future. The morning after their return to Dry Willow, the air felt lighter, fresher, as if even the wind had been waiting for Clara to come back with her head held high. The letter from her father now rested in a frame on the mantel, right beside Elias's old spurs and the small carved horse his brother had made as a boy. Symbols of past and present, loss and healing. Clara walked the ranch that day with a steadier step. The animals greeted her like she'd never left. The hens clucked with familiar chaos, and Juneberry nudged her arm with a soft snort, wanting apples. But something had changed in Clara, not on the outside, but in the stillness of her breath, the confidence of her silence. She didn't just belong now. She had chosen this life. Elias watched her from the corral, his hand resting on the gatepost, heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. He couldn't remember the last time he looked forward to tomorrow. But now, tomorrow felt like something worth building. He walked over, handed her a small envelope, not like the legal one from Boone, but hand-scrawled and crooked at the corners. She raised a brow. "What's this?" "Just something I've been meaning to ask." She opened it. Inside was a folded scrap of paper. Just one sentence. "Would you stay? Not just for now, but for always?" She looked up, eyes glassy. "Are you asking me to marry you, Elias Grant?" He nodded slowly. "I am. Though I reckon that wasn't the most poetic proposal." Clara laughed. Not loud, not dramatic, just a warm, honest sound that made the horses prick their ears. "It's perfect," she said, "because it's you." She stepped forward, slid her arms around his waist, and whispered against his chest. Yes, the wedding was simple, just like the life they'd come to love. Held under a cottonwood tree near the creek bed, surrounded by prairie grass, a few curious cattle, and the dry willow pastor who brought more dust than ceremony. Clara wore a dress she made herself from the fabric they bought together that day in town. Elias wore his best shirt, the one she secretly restitched when the elbow tore. No lace, no fuss. Just two people, a vow, and the wind to carry their promises. That evening, they shared peach pie on the porch, watching the sky turn to lavender. "You ever think," Clara said softly, "about how odd it is that all this started because of a letter?" Elias smiled. "I think about it every day." "And I wasn't what you ordered," she teased, leaning into his side. "No," he said. "You were better. You didn't just fill a space in my life. You gave it meaning." They sat in silence for a while, letting the world exhale with them. And for once, there were no more ghosts chasing behind. No storms brewing on the horizon. Just a woman who came west looking for herself, and a man who didn't know he'd been waiting. Together now, whole, far off, across the wide plain. The wind rolled gently through the grass, and dry willow, small, steady, and quiet, held one more story in its soil, not of perfect people, but of healing, of choosing love, of building home, and of finding everything you never knew you were missing, in someone you never expected. The first year of marriage passed like a gentle breeze, warm, steady, and full of small joys. Clara's garden thrived, the ranch held strong, and their laughter echoed more often than the wind. But by midsummer of the next year, the skies changed. Not with storms, but with silence. The rain stopped falling. The creeks ran dry. The grass withered. And the earth cracked open under the July sun like it was mourning something. Dry willow was no stranger to hard seasons. But this was different. This was a drought the likes of which the West hadn't seen in a decade. Elias stood at the edge of the pasture, hat pulled low, eyes scanning the dust that once was grass. The cattle stood too still, ribs showing, tongues lolling as they clustered near the last muddy trough. Clara came up beside him, her apron dusty, her hands calloused from carrying buckets. "How bad?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just exhaled. We've lost 4 head in 2 weeks. If the well drops another inch, we won't last to September." Clara looked towards the hills, her jaw tight. "I could take the wagon east, trade at the railway depot, see if I can find supplies." Elias frowned. "That's a 2-day ride, Clara. It ain't safe alone." "I'm not made of porcelain, Elias. And this ranch needs more than hope." He studied her. That same fierce spark in her eyes he saw the day she arrived. And it scared him. Not because she was bold, but because he knew she'd do anything for this place. Even risk herself. They argued that night. Not loud, not cruel, but deeply. Elias wanted to sell a portion of the herd. Clara wanted to hold out. Said they'd come too far to give up now. He said they needed to think practically. She said practical was what nearly broke her before love found her. They both went to bed, with silence between them. The kind that doesn't sleep. 2 days later, Clara left at dawn, with Juneberry and a half-empty wagon. She didn't kiss Elias goodbye, and he didn't stop her. But as the dust of her trail faded into the morning light, Elias realized something that twisted his gut. Love doesn't always feel like love when you're afraid to lose it. The sky was white with heat as Clara rode east, the prairie shimmering like it had something to hide. Juneberry's hooves kicked up dry dust, and the wagon wheels creaked with each mile. Tired, thirsty, but determined. Clara kept her eyes ahead. She had packed only what they could afford to spare. Sacks of dried beans, a few strips of salted meat, and 2 canteens filled to the brim. Her mission was simple. Reach the depot, find a trader with extra feed or water barrels, and return before Elias changed his mind and came after her. But 2 things weighed heavier than the heat: the crack in her heart from the way they'd parted, and the stranger watching her from the ridge. She saw him just before sunset on the first night. A lone rider silhouetted against the hills, too far to call out to, but close enough that her instincts stirred. She didn't stop. She set up camp under a scraggly cottonwood, tied Juneberry tight, and lit no fire. Just chewed dried bread in the dark. One hand on the old pistol Elias had taught her to clean. Sleep came light and broken. By morning, there was no sign of the rider. Back at the ranch, Elias woke early, but didn't touch his coffee. The house felt hollow. Not because Clara was gone, but because they hadn't been right when she left. He thought of going after her, saddling up, finding her halfway, just to say, "I was wrong. You're braver than I am, and I love you for it." But pride's a stubborn thing, especially in a man raised by silence. So instead, he checked the troughs, reinforced the fencing, and tried to bury the rising ache. Meanwhile, Clara reached the railway depot by late afternoon. A few wagons stood parked, and a trading post buzzed with tired voices and angry deals. "Water barrels?" the depot clerk scoffed. "Ain't none been in for 5 days. Folks farther west are buying 'em up before they even hit the station." Clara clenched her jaw. "What about hay? Feed?" The man shrugged. "You'd have better luck finding a live creek." She stepped outside, frustration biting at the back of her throat. And that's when she saw him again. The same rider, closer now, leaning against a post near her wagon. A narrow face, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that didn't blink enough. "You Clara Grant?" he asked, tipping his hat slowly. Clara didn't answer. "Don't worry," he said, voice slick as oil. "Ain't here to cause trouble. I've got a delivery. Something your husband arranged." She frowned. "Elias didn't mention anyone." The man smiled. "Well, guess he wanted to surprise you." From the back of his own horse, he pulled a small wrapped package. Heavy, rough. Inside was a coil of copper pipe and a folded note. "If the well runs low, this might help. E." Her heart caught. He had been thinking of her, planning for her, trusting her. But before she could thank him or think, the rider was gone. No name, no return trail, just dust. That night, as Clara made camp beneath a broken fence line, she held the pipe in her lap and the note tight in her hand. Maybe Elias didn't say it the way poets did, but in copper and ink, she heard it loud and clear. He loved her, even through silence, even through drought. She looked up at the stars, heart steady again. Tomorrow, she'd ride home, with or without water, but not without hope. Clara returned to the ranch 3 days after she left. Her wagon no heavier than when she set out, save for the pipe, the note, and a small bag of oats someone at the depot had traded her out of pity, more than profit. The land looked drier, the sky flatter, and Elias, standing at the gate, looked like he hadn't slept much since she'd gone. She pulled the wagon to a slow stop. Neither of them spoke right away. Juneberry snorted. A chicken darted across the yard. The wind stirred the dust like it was looking for a place to settle. Then finally Elias said, "I shouldn't have let you leave like that." Clara hopped down, brushing dust from her skirt. "I needed to go." He nodded, eyes on her face. "But I should have gone with you." She stepped closer. "You trusted me. That matters." He looked down. "I was scared." She softened. "Me too." Then she reached into the wagon and pulled out the copper pipe, holding it up like a flag between them. "This yours?" Elias blinked. "No." Clara frowned. "A man gave it to me at the depot. Said it was from you, with a note." Elias shook his head. "I didn't send anyone." The breeze went still. Clara's fingers tightened on the pipe. "He knew my name, Elias. Knew I was married to you." Elias took the pipe, turned it slowly in his hands. "You think it was Boone? He's not the type to go quiet," Clara said. "But someone sent him. Or someone else is watching." Elias's jaw clenched. "We need to be ready. No one just hands out metal and messages for free." They didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, not entirely, but because something unspoken hung in the walls between them. Not a fight, not regret. Just that ache that comes when two people love each other so fiercely. They're scared of watching the other one break. So instead of sleep, Elias sat at the table, sketching out plans to reinforce the well with the pipe. Clara brewed coffee, slow and quiet, then sat across from him. "You ever think," she asked, "that maybe the hardest part of loving someone isn't the storms, but the spaces in between them?" Elias met her gaze. "I think the hardest part is staying soft in a world that keeps drying up." Clara smiled faintly. "Then we've got our work cut out for us." He reached across the table and took her hand. Fingers rough, grip gentle. "No droughts taking you from me, Clara. No silence, no stranger. We'll keep building this, even if the sky never rains again." And in that moment, Even the dry wind outside seemed to hush, as if it too believed them. But beyond the hills, in a campsite hidden between stone bluffs, someone read over a copy of Elias's land deed. Someone with a thick ledger, a crooked grin, and a hired hand with a worn pistol. The drought was killing more than cattle out west. It was killing patience. And when greed mixed with thirst, it bred the kind of trouble that didn't knock on doors. It tore fences down instead. The days turned sharper. Not colder, just meaner. Dry willow was brittle under the weight of the drought. A single spark could have set the whole prairie ablaze. Elias worked sunup to sundown, reinforcing the well, feeding what little he could to the cattle, and watching the sky like it owed him something. But clouds didn't keep promises. Clara held the house together with grit and grace. She stretched flour thinner, made soap from ashes, wrote to the neighboring homesteads, and rode out once a week to check on old Mrs. Harwood, who hadn't left her porch since June. But the truth was, their ranch, like many others, was nearing the edge, and someone was waiting for it to fall. It happened on a Thursday. Clara had gone into town for salt and news. Elias stayed behind to check the southern fence line, the one nearest the dry creek bed. That's where he found it. 3 fence posts, slashed clean. Barbed wire, cut and curled on the ground like a dead snake. Boot prints led in both directions, from the road and into their grazing land. He knelt beside them. Not cowhands. Too small. Too deliberate. One set of boots. One set of hooves. Someone had trespassed. And not for the first time. When Clara returned that evening, Elias was already in the barn. Sleeves rolled, sharpening tools with a kind of focus that worried her. He looked up when she entered. "You see anything in town?" he asked. "Just a man asking about water rights. Said he worked for a land speculator out of Red Mesa." Kept glancing at the church map like he was hunting for weak spots. Elias set the blade down. "We had a visitor too. Cut the fence near the dry creek." Clara stiffened. "Did they take anything?" "Not yet, but they're watching." She exhaled. "Who do you think it is?" Elias shook his head. "Could be Boone. Could be someone hungrier. The kind who doesn't knock before taking what they want." He stepped closer, voice low but sure. "We need help." Clara met his gaze. "From who?" "The other ranchers. If they're cutting fences here, they're doing it elsewhere. We stand together, or we lose it all one piece at a time." That Sunday, Elias and Clara rode to the old meeting hall just outside town. Dust coated the windows, and the benches inside still smelled like summer sweat and pine oil. Only 7 ranchers showed up. Sunburned men, tired wives, and a boy barely old enough to carry a shovel. Elias stood in front and spoke plain. "They're circling us, watching for weakness. This drought has made all of us lean. But we're not broken yet. We share water, share labor, and we ride patrol. Not alone, but together." Some grumbled, some nodded. Most stayed silent. But Clara stepped forward beside him. "My father taught me that a field can't grow if each seed is buried in its own hole. Community's the same. We don't stand together. The wind will bury us one by one." That changed something. Not everything, but enough. They returned home that night with 4 handshakes, 2 water jugs, and the promise of a rotating watch on the ridge. For the first time in weeks, the ranch didn't feel so alone. But as they lay in bed, the moon casting pale light across the wall, Clara whispered, "Do you think they'll come back?" Elias didn't lie. "Yes." She turned toward him, head against his chest. "Then we meet them, together." And outside, beyond the safety of their walls, the night listened. The attacks didn't come with gunshots or galloping hooves. They came slow, silent. A missing water bucket one morning. A saddle sliced through by evening. A cow found limping, her leg twisted in a snare that hadn't been there the day before. Whoever they were, they didn't want war. They wanted fear, and they were good at planting it. Elias and Clara kept moving. They reinforced the well casing with the copper pipe. They added a new bolt to the barn door and hung bells on the gate. At night, they slept lighter. Elias with his rifle close. Clara with her father's locket tucked in her hand, like armor. But fear doesn't ask permission to settle in. And by week's end, even Clara's courage had begun to ache. Then, just before dawn on a Monday, the barn went up in flames. Elias woke to Juneberry's shrill cry and the flickering glow outside their window. He flew out of bed, barefoot, grabbing a pail and shouting Clara's name before the words had shape. She was already ahead of him, racing toward the blaze, with her dress half-buttoned and hair flying loose. The fire moved fast, too fast for dry wood and an empty oil lamp. Someone had poured accelerant. Someone wanted to break them. They got the animals out. Burned hands, singed hair, scorched boots, but no lives lost. Except the chickens. The barn, however, was gone, a blackened skeleton against the waking sun. The sheriff came by noon. Sheriff Tom Ridley. Old, worn, half useless but trying. "No proof it was sabotage," he mumbled. "Could have been a lantern left lit." Elias stared him down. "You think I don't know my own damn barn?" Clara stepped in, calm but firm. "We've been watched. Fences cut. Animals injured. This wasn't chance, Sheriff." Tom scratched his neck, eyes weary. "I'll write it up, but unless you got names, I can't do much." He left a full hour later, slower than usual. Even he could feel it in the air. Dry willow was changing. That evening, Elias sat on the porch, a bucket of water at his feet, and his hands raw from the fire. Clara came out with 2 cups of cold tea and handed him one. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For bringing you here. For thinking a letter and a ring would keep the world from touching us." Clara shook her head. "You didn't bring me into danger, Elias. You brought me into truth." He looked at her. She held his gaze. "Life's not about escaping pain," she said. "It's about choosing who you walk through it with." He swallowed. "And if more comes?" She took his hand. "Then we build again. As many times as it takes." Later that night, a coyote howled in the hills, but Elias and Clara didn't flinch, because this time, they weren't just waiting for danger. They were watching right back. The barn still smoldered 2 days later. Blackened timber lay scattered like broken ribs across the yard. The scent of charred wood clung to everything. Clothes, skin, even the air. Elias and Clara, didn't talk about rebuilding it right away. Instead, they did what survivors always do. They worked. Elias dug post holes for a new fence line, hands blistered and stubborn. Clara salvaged anything not burned. Nails, hinges, the old weather vane still shaped like a star. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Every shared glance, every tool passed, every ache endured side by side, said what words couldn't. We're still here, you and me. They can scorch the walls, but not what's between us. One evening, as the sun dragged long shadows over the prairie, their nearest neighbor, Grace O'Hara, arrived in her wagon. A widow herself, sharp-eyed and kind-hearted, with twin boys too wild for their boots. She handed Clara a basket of food, and Elias a coil of spare rope. Words travelin', Grace said softly. Others are nervous too. Whoever lit your barn might try elsewhere. Clara nodded. It's not just about water anymore. Someone's circling this land like a vulture. Grace leaned closer. Some say it's not Boone anymore. Say it's Pike Burrows. Elias stiffened. Burrows? He repeated. I thought he left Wyoming. Turns out, when a man's debt gets too deep, he comes back meaner than he left. Clara frowned. Who is he? Land agent? Elias muttered. Used to push desperate ranchers off their plots. Then resell it under forged claims. Got chased out of Montana. Years back. Grace nodded grimly. He's sweet-talking folks now, offering to buy whole properties in Dry Willow at half price. Some are scared enough to sign. Clara's voice hardened. He's burning barns to lower the price. Grace looked between them. You didn't hear it from me, but I thought you ought to know. That night, Elias sat at the table, oil lamp flickering low. The copper pipe he once gave Clara, now reworked as part of a water system, proof that they could rebuild. Clara stood behind him, reading the map they'd drawn of the ranch. If we lose the well, she said, we lose everything. Elias nodded. Then we guard it. They both knew Pike wouldn't stop at fire. He wanted fear. He wanted ownership. But he'd come to the wrong ranch, because Clara and Elias hadn't just built a home. They'd built a life no man could sign away. The next morning, they posted a sign at the edge of their land. Painted in red, on a plank of salvaged barnwood, it read, Not for sale, not for taking, we stand. Simple, bold, defiant. Elias nailed it into the post himself. Clara at his side, the wind whipping at their clothes like it, too, believed in them. And from a ridge, not far away, a figure watched from horseback. Dark hat, lean frame, ledger tucked in his coat. Pike Burrows smiled, not kindly. The days that followed felt stretched thin, like thread pulled too tight. Elias and Clara moved with precision now. She handled the house, the livestock, the drying garden. He patrolled the property line at dawn and dusk, rifle slung across his shoulder, and ears tuned to even the smallest crack of twig. The ranch didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a fort, but neither of them ran. Because love, they'd learned, isn't just about soft mornings and whispered promises. It's about choosing to stay, even when staying hurts. On a hot Thursday morning, Clara spotted a rider approaching the property. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out onto the porch, Juneberry stamping nervously in the paddock behind her. The rider was well-dressed, too well-dressed for dust roads and dry air. Tall boots polished, hat clean. Shirt too white to be honest. He stopped just short of the not-for-sale sign and tipped his hat with a slow, slick smile. "Mrs. Grant, I presume." His voice was molasses over gravel. Clara folded her arms. "That's right. I'm Pike Burrows. I believe we have mutual interest in the future of this land." Elias stepped out beside her, silent. Burrows took a slow breath. "Now, I understand there's been a misunderstanding about intent. I'm here with opportunity and a fair offer." "We're not selling," Elias said flatly. Burrows didn't blink. "This land's dry, dying, and there's buyers east of here who'd pay good coin for what little water remains. You two could walk away today with enough to start fresh anywhere you want." Clara's eyes narrowed. "We already did start fresh, right here." Burrows's smile thinned. "You really want to die over dust?" Elias stepped forward. "No, but I'd fight over what's ours." Burrows paused, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Official, thick, marked with a red seal. He handed it to Clara. "Claim says a water source on your land. Connects to a shared spring system. One you don't legally own alone. Filed last week. If approved, you'll be required to grant access or vacate." Clara didn't take the paper. "You forged that," she said calmly. Burrows shrugged. "You can try to fight it, but I've got men and time. You don't." He turned his horse without another word. As he rode away, Clara looked to Elias. "We'll need a lawyer," she said. He nodded. "And the plan." That night, the kitchen was quiet, except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Elias sat with the claim document spread across the table, reading each line like it was a weapon. Clara stood at the sink, washing the same cup twice. Finally, she said, "What if he wins?" Elias looked up. "Then we lose land. Not us." She turned to face him. "But this land is us now." He stood, crossed the room, and wrapped his arms around her. "No, Clara. We are us. This ranch is where we grew, not who we are." She nodded into his shoulder, her voice small. "I just don't want to lose another home." "You won't," he whispered, "because no matter where we stand, if you're there, I'll never be lost." The next morning, they hitched the wagon and rode for Twin Forks, with the forged claim in hand, a stack of letters from neighbors who'd also been threatened, and hearts still full of fire. They weren't just defending a patch of land anymore. They were defending the life they chose. And some lives don't have a price tag. Twin Forks was louder than Dry Willow. More people, more wagons, more noise. But Clara and Elias didn't come for the town. They came for justice. And justice, it turned out, had an office that smelled like ink and stale biscuits. Mr. Hallbridge, the same lawyer who'd helped Clara once before, blinked behind thick glasses as she laid Pike Burrows' forged claim on his desk. "This is serious," he murmured, reading. Elias crossed his arms. "You can prove it's false?" Hallbridge frowned. "Forgery's hard to prove. But if we can get statements from other landowners Pike's approached, maybe even track his previous evictions, we might have enough to discredit him." Clara stepped forward. "We brought names and letters." She laid out 6 folded notes from neighbors. Each one told a similar story. Coercion, pressure, threats. Some signed in ink, some in dirt-smeared thumbprints. Hallbridge leaned back in his chair. "You've done half my work already. Just tell us what's next," Elias said. The lawyer looked at them both. "You'll have to stand before the county magistrate. It'll take time, maybe weeks. But if you can hold on, we've got a real chance." Back at the ranch, the days grew hotter. The cattle thinned. The grass vanished. But Clara and Elias held fast. Each morning, Clara tied her hair back and walked the perimeter, checking for signs of sabotage. Each evening, Elias cleaned the rifle, rebuilt the tool shed, and made sure no one could sneak in again. And though they barely spoke about Burroughs now, his name hung in the dry air like a shadow at noon. One night, Clara found Elias sitting under the stars, back against the water barrel, eyes on the sky. She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You still think we'll win?" He nodded. "Not just the land. All of it. Us." She didn't speak for a while. Then, "Even if we lose everything but this, just this right here, I think we'll still be rich." Elias looked at her, and for a long moment, neither said a word. Because they didn't need to. In Twin Forks, Burroughs sat behind his own desk, papers scattered like poker cards, a glass of whiskey untouched. One of his hired hands, the same man who delivered the fake copper pipe, leaned on the doorframe. "They're not backing down," he said. Burroughs smiled, tight and slow. "Good. Makes the breaking more satisfying." But Burroughs didn't know something important, that the couple he was trying to crush had already been broken once. By loss, by fear, by fire. And they had rebuilt themselves from ash. He wasn't fighting weak hearts. He was fighting true ones. And true hearts don't surrender. The hearing was set for the second Tuesday in September. That gave Elias and Clara exactly 11 days. 11 days to gather statements, check records, and prepare a defense not just of land, but of truth. Hallbridge sent word from Twin Forks. "Burroughs has hired his own lawyer. Aggressive type. Be ready." Elias read the letter, folded it, and tossed it on the table. "Let them bring teeth," he muttered. "We've got roots." Clara wrote every evening now. Letters to other ranchers, copies of her father's land note, sworn statements from old neighbors back in Missouri who remembered the day she'd left. Each one was a piece of the wall they were building. Not a wall of wood or wire, but of story. Solid, undeniable, and hers. She and Elias spoke little about the trial itself. Instead, they poured their energy into the ranch. Not just to stay alive, but to remind themselves why they were fighting. They planted late beans, repaired the coop, even painted the porch rail with leftover whitewash. And every night, after the chores and the writing and the planning, they sat on that porch with calloused hands intertwined. They were tired, but not broken. The night before they left for Twin Forks, a storm finally rolled in. Real rain. It started as a soft patter on the roof and built to a steady downpour. Elias stepped out into it, hatless, grinning like a boy who'd seen snow for the first time. Clara laughed from the door. "You're going to ruin your boots." "They've been dry for too long," he called back. She walked out beside him, and for the first time in months, They stood under the open sky with water in their hair and hope soaking into the soil around them. Elias pulled her into an embrace and whispered, "We can't lose. Not now." Clara looked up, water running down her cheeks like tears. But these ones were welcome. "No," she said. "We've already won. We stayed." At the Twin Forks courthouse, the room was warm and packed with tension. Burroughs sat straight-backed beside a sharp-jawed lawyer named Foley. His boots were polished, his eyes cold. And when Clara and Elias walked in, neither man blinked. The magistrate, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a face carved by wind, called the room to order. "Let's hear the claims." Foley rose first, presenting forged maps, water rights twisted by legal loopholes, and statements from men likely paid with more coin than conscience. Then came Clara. She stepped forward, spine straight, her voice clear as church bells at noon. "My father gave me the land because he knew I'd protect it, not sell it to the first smooth talker who came knocking." She held up the original deed. She named each neighbor who had been approached by Burroughs. And when Elias stood beside her, holding a map of the creek system they had hand-drawn, annotated, and triple-checked, the room grew still. Not because of the facts alone, but because of the weight of what they'd endured to speak them. The magistrate took a full hour to deliberate. When she returned, her voice was firm. "The claim filed by Mr. Burroughs is rejected. Evidence of misrepresentation, intimidation, and deliberate misinformation is clear. Land rights remain with Mr. and Mrs. Grant. Court is adjourned." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Clara exhaled, one deep, trembling breath, and Elias let out a sound between a laugh and a prayer. They had kept their land, their life, their future. Burroughs stood in silence, face unreadable. As he passed them on his way out, Clara met his eyes. "I hope you remember this day," she said calmly. "Because I will. Every time it rains." He didn't reply, and that was the last dry willow ever saw of Pike Burroughs. Back home, the fields waited, still thirsty, still scarred, but ready. And Elias and Clara? They didn't just return as ranchers. They returned as something more. A family not built by name, but by fire, by faith, and by choosing each other again and again, even when the world tried to take it all away. The weeks after the trial brought slow but steady change. Rain returned, shy at first, then bold. The land drank it up like a long-lost friend. Green spread through the dust like forgiveness. The creek near the southern fence trickled again, singing low songs that made Clara smile in her sleep. The barn had not yet been rebuilt, but Elias had started drawing up plans. Better ones. Stronger. With wider stalls and a loft Clara wanted to turn into a reading nook someday. But they didn't rush anymore, because the fight had taught them something deeper than survival. The home they'd built was never just the walls. It was the love that lived inside them. One morning, as the first hints of autumn colored the cottonwoods gold, Clara came out to the porch, carrying something behind her back. Elias, shirt rolled to his elbows, was sanding a new board for the gate. She stood quiet until he looked up. grinning at her, like he always did now. "What are you hiding?" he asked. She pulled a tiny bundle from behind her, a hand-stitched baby blanket. And in that silence, where even the birds seemed to pause for breath, Elias stepped forward and touched the soft edge with his work-worn fingers. "You sure?" he whispered. She nodded. He took her in his arms, and the world spun a little slower. Not because everything was easy now, but because everything mattered. Months passed. The new barn stood tall by Christmas. The garden slept under frost. But Clara planted garlic anyway. Said it was good luck for the coming spring. Neighbors stopped by more often. The ranch became not just a home, but a gathering place. A symbol of what resilience looked like when it was shared. And when the baby came, a girl with dark hair and Clara's steady eyes, Elias sat outside with her, wrapped in that same little blanket, staring at the sky like it had finally kept its promise. He whispered her name like a prayer. June, named not just for the month, but for the new season she brought with her. In time, the hardships faded into stories. The fire, the trial. Even Pike Burrows, a name now met with knowing glances and firm shoulders. What remained were fences rebuilt stronger, fields planted deeper, and love. A love that had been ordered by letter, tested by flame, and proven true. One sunrise at a time.